Welcome to the Monday Monologue. Well, today we're going to talk about the black magic of voicing an amplifier, and this is something that goes way beyond like computer simulations or drawing load lines and all that kind of stuff. To me, all that's just the beginning. You know, once you build the amp, you can hook it up to something like the audio analyzer suite and look at some things like frequency response and distortion profiles as far as, you know, second to third order harmonics or total distortion versus power, where the clipping points are and all that kind of stuff. But none of that gets you to a good sounding amp. And one of the things I did when I started on my 12X7EL34, before I even put it on the audio analyzer suite, I hooked it up, ran it for about 2 hours, kind of let things settle in, and then started tuning the shade feedback resistance to get the EQ of the highs versus the lows balanced out in the amp and to get it sounding good. And I was comparing it to this amp because I know after hours and hours of testing and listening and trying different things that I've got this amp dialed in. And so if I can get that amp to sound as good as this amp, as far as the EQ or the voicing of it, then it's going to be nice. It's not going to be fatiguing. It's going to have, you know, nice detail, all that kind of stuff that you listen for in a good amp. So what did it take to voice this amp? Well, here are all the output tubes that I tried in this amp. Tried the plain EL34s, tried the EL34Ls, we tried the Electroharmonic 6CA7s, we tried some tube amp doctor EL34s, some big bottle ones, tried some Gold Lion KT77s, tried some KT66s. There's about 4 other pairs of 6CA7 type tubes upstairs that I rolled into this thing trying to figure out what was the best sounding in this amp with the way it was designed. And part of it was tuning the shade feedback resistor, because less resistance in that plate to plate feedback loop makes the amp sound brighter. You get too much in and it starts sounding kind of muffled, and tubes can't make up for that muffled sound that it gets from too much shade feedback, which I feel like a lot of people put too much in when they're using it. They're trying to get it to bring the harmonic distortion down, when I found that a lot of the harmonic distortion comes from the front end tubes and how they're biased. And so got another pile of tubes over here of tubes that we tried in the front end of this amp, trying to see, hey, which one of these sound best. I started off with these cheap little metal tubes. They just don't sound that great, and they have a lot of distortion. Tried some of these Hitachis, tried some RCAs, tried some tungstol metal tubes, thinking, well, maybe the RCAs aren't better. The tungstols aren't a whole lot better. And then I got some of these JAN 6SQ7 GTs and little navy emblems on them. These sound good. There's nothing wrong with these tubes in this amp. But then the real magic was these crazy National Union tubes that are in this amp that are almost impossible to find. I don't know what the deal is, but these National Union tubes sound really sweet. So part of the voicing is what coupling caps sound good in it. Tried some MyFlexes, tried a couple of other ones, and tried some higher end Mundorfs, and actually like the aluminum oil better. And even the plain EVO aluminum sound good. The oils are maybe a little cleaner sounding, but either one of those sound fine. To me, the higher end Mundorfs are a little too bright, and they just, I don't know, there's just something about them that I feel like the balance between the mid-range and the bright is too much. And the aluminum oils strike a good balance there. Then the next thing is dialing in the resistor that is used with the LED on the cathode of the driver tube, because not only is that setting the bias, using an unbypassed resistor with the LED injects a little bit of negative feedback into the cathode of the driver tube. And that can help tone down some distortion, but then you don't want to get the bias too low because then that creates distortion or can create other issues. So there's fine tuning of that. Also got to fine tune the value of the dropping resistor from the B plus to the front end. That can affect the sound of the amp. And like we found recently, changing the power supply caps can make a difference. And I didn't realize what a huge difference that was. And I'm just by luck stumbled onto those good sounding Solines. I could have easily have started out with those WEMA caps and been fighting those things the whole way. I did run into that issue when I built the Blue Glow KT88 amp. Kager had shown in his schematic for the 60J7 to bypass all the caps in the amp with 0.33 UF caps, and I was like, well, these are so many, I can't afford a bunch of these. I'm just going to get some of the little, the cheaper little Mundorf, I forgot what, metal film, metal something, MKP, I think they are, the little cheap ones, because I couldn't afford to, spend $15 times 10 or whatever it was going to be. And I didn't realize the negative impact that bypassing those caps had on the sound. And man, I fought with that, was swapping driver tubes and tweaking stuff. And until I pulled those caps out of the amp, that amp never sounded good to me. And again, Kager probably put those in there because either the speakers they were using or something required the amp to be voiced that way, or just he liked the way that sounded. That was his, kind of the Kager sound, So I guess what I'm getting to is we're just starting to dive into this on the 12AX7 amp. And let me go get it. So here's the 12AX7 EL34 amp. That is my next big project. And I started out by taking it upstairs, hooking it up to my system. It had a 300K feedback resistor. It sounded a little muted to me. And it also was taking a lot of volume to drive it to listening levels off of my CD player. Because normally just a little over halfway on my 6SQ7 is rocking. It's a great place. I was having to use almost 5/8 volume to get that same sound pressure level. So, I was thinking originally, hey, a 12AX7 is just two 6SQ7s in one bottle. Of course, that's not exactly the case. And every tube is going to sound different as far as like brands and stuff. And I know there's people that say, tube rolling isn't audible, or if the tube's to spec, it'll sound the same. And I can understand that if you're running like a push-pull amp with, 20 dB or whatever, a ton of global negative feedback with, Zobels and all that stuff to like really dial in the negative feedback so that the tubes aren't going to be heard, and all that's going to kind of counterbalance all that stuff. But that's not what we're building. We're building a single-ended amp that, while it's not a zero feedback, it's a different kind of negative feedback. And I believe that with this style amp, you're going to hear rolling tubes a lot more than you normally would. And so that's one of the good things and the curses of this thing, is trying to find the right combination of tubes and feedback percentage versus the bias point of the driver tube and voltages, and getting all that stuff kind of sunk into a good sounding voiced amp that sounds, I'm not going to even say neutral, that it sounds good, and that it's not fatiguing, and that it's got nice detail, it's got some sparkle on the top end, vocals, are right there, and the vocals sound right. You listen to like some Michael Jackson or even some Elton John, if the amp's not voiced right, their voices sound shrill or just don't sound natural. I know I got an amp getting close when I can listen to Madman Across the Water, and Elton's voice sounds like a guy's voice that's got some oomph to it. I mean, it's hard to describe what I'm talking about, but I know when I hear it when it's wrong. And this amp isn't there yet. And I think it's important, given this is the first amp that I'm putting out in the public, that this thing is voiced right. And I guarantee you, there's a reason why Deckware puts those specific Russian tubes in that little amp that I reviewed here, because they know that there's some secret sauce there with those tubes and how they interact. It wasn't just like, oh, well, yeah, I can buy a bunch of these at a deal somewhere. That wasn't what guided them. I promise you. If some JJ tubes had sounded better, or some even gold lion tubes, they would have just bumped the price up a little bit and done that. They wanted to put out an amp that was voiced to a way that was pleasing for people to listen to. And it is. I mean, especially with the right sensitivity speakers, that's a great sounding little amp. And that's what I want this to be. But my hope is that because the 12AX7 socket here allows the use of so many different tubes, that we can tune this thing so that if you've got super sensitive speakers, use something like a Gold Lion 12AX7. If you've got medium sensitivity speakers and you need to get the distortion down or move further up in the wattage rating of the amp that's centered for the sound pressure level that you want to listen to, you can put something like a 7025 in it, or I think it's a 5751 was the cleanest of the three. That kind of stuff I think is really cool. And all these tubes will also go in the output of this amp. The other thing that I still have to do is I've got two different sets of output transformers to build two more amps and compare listening to the different output transformers with the same tubes, and then, you know, roll tubes in them and see which one has the secret sauce. And that's what you're getting when you buy it from me, or, you know, and I'm going to tell you which tube sounded the best. But I think it's important for people to realize, like when I say an EL34L is a great sounding tube, in this amp, it sounded so much better than the rest of these. I mean, and you would think these super nice, you know, KT66 black bottle tubes, I'm sure in some amp they sound fantastic. But in this amp, well, the 6SQ7 amp that we were just looking at with those National Union driver tubes, these output tubes sounded the best. And so I've got to figure out all of that on this. And do I wish I didn't have to do this? Yeah. And is this going to take some time? Yeah. We've probably got another month at least of building amps and then tube rolling. And then I want to get, you know, some other opinions on listening to, hey, what do you hear, you know, when you hear this? And I've already got a couple of people lined up to take, you know, a couple of 2-3 amps over to their house, and at least two of them are going to look identical, so they won't be able to tell which one's which when they listen to them. And then the same thing with the tubes. I'm not going to say, hey, here's what I think sounded best, what do you think? It's going to be, which one, you know, listen to this, then listen to this. And it's going to be like that thing when you go to the optometrist and they're flipping that little thing over and they'll go, which one looks clearer, this or this? And then when they say, okay, that, they say, okay, from these two, which looks better, this or this? And that's basically what you're doing. And none of this stuff I've been able to measure. When I put them on the audio analyzer suite, the distortion profiles, yes, I can see that. But honestly, it's hard to hear the difference between like 1% and 2% second order harmonics. It's not that audible. And sometimes the 2% is going to sound better. Just as far as like just listening, what sounds sweeter, it might be the 2, maybe 3% distortion. It's hard to say. And that's all personal preference too. But again, a lot of this is just kind of a black art. And I don't think that a lot of people sit down and do this stuff. They just, hey, here's a price point for these tubes, or here are these ones, I can get these PS veins or whatever, and they just put them in the amp, and if it doesn't sound good, they're like, oh, the tubes just need to break in or whatever. And, I know some people swear that tubes take 50 hours or 300 hours or something to break in. I just don't buy that. There's a little bit of change, but after about 30 minutes, I feel like 90% of whatever break-in needs to be done is done. And then that's pretty much the sound signature that tube is going to have. And you can tell if it's going to be a fit for that amp pretty quickly. And it's obvious when you change the tubes, to me, the sound difference. So that's what we're going to be dealing with here, is trying to voice this thing to where I think it sounds good. And I know people have asked, oh, I want mine triode, and I want mine this, that, and the other. I just don't think that's going to be a great idea. I think the problem is going to be that somebody that says they like triode is going to buy it when it's voiced for ultralinear, and when they flip the switch, they're going to go, well, that doesn't sound good. It's like, well, you're right. If it's triode strapped, it's going to need an electroharmonics driver tube, not a JJ. It might need 6CA7 or KT77s instead of EL34s. And then the other thing is, an EL34 tube, you can actually triode strap the suppressor grid to the plate along with the screen. And does that sound better? And then there's that whole thing that I need to look into that. The Haze something mod that they did on that deckwear amp where they capacitor couple the suppressor grid to the plate. And so, yeah, there's, if I'm going to do a triode one of these amps, it might need to be a EL34 tube only, triode only amp, probably going to have 0 negative feedback, and it's going to be a differently tuned or voiced amplifier from the ultralinear version. Because I don't want to halfway do something. And so, again, that's what we're going to be doing. And I'm going to try to walk you through some of that process. Not all of this I'm going to be able to do on camera. But, I could come back and say, hey, we tried all of these and this happened. And, I'm going to show you, the build on the second one with the musical power supply transformers. And I want to thank some of you for your comments on the wiring. Yeah, there's some ideas you gave me or some thoughts you gave me about how to wire the next one up. Need to do a few little changes. Not that this one has any noise, but just theoretically, especially if somebody's running some hypersensitive speakers, that we can probably do like the driver tube heater wiring a little better and the ground a little better for the front end section. So I've got some ideas on that. Plus I got to wire the power switch different. And I'll show you that in the next build. Oh, and one final thing. Some guy on a forum was saying that they didn't want to use one of my schematics in their build because it's hers and it's like it's proprietary, or that, well, that's her circuit, I can't change anything on it. Guys, all this stuff's open source. None of this stuff is like copyright or trademark. I mean, a lot of this stuff came from schematics that Kegger posted online that I know if he was still alive, he would love that people are taking those designs and tweaking them or adding things or, changing things up to voice them the way they want it to sound. I know I'm excited when somebody sends me hey, here's a picture of my 300B mono blocks that I built, basically using your DIY budget 300B, but I changed some things around and did this stuff to it. I mean, I think that's awesome that people take this and run with it or add to it, and I can learn some stuff from what you guys are doing. And that's the whole point of stuff being open source, is to be able to share it. And again, even though this amp is going to be up for, put on the website for sale, it's mainly for people that either don't have the skills, or don't think they do, or they don't have the time, or just don't have the interest. They want to just listen to a good sounding amp without having to go through all the learning curve or making it themselves, or they have no interest in doing that. And I don't want people buying kits that don't have fun building stuff or doing it, and they're doing it just to be cheap. I don't want people buying kits for that reason. If you're going to buy a kit or buy, follow my bomb or whatever, it should be because you enjoy doing it. So anyway, I'm excited about this project. Obviously, I've been kind of preoccupied with getting the business end of this set up. I still got to figure out the bookkeeping part of it, but I think I got the bank stuff all set up with a business credit card and all that kind of stuff. And I got the LLC stuff done. I've got my tax certificates at the people I need it. So like at Mauser and stuff, I'm not paying tax on all these parts I'm buying. And, some of the stuff I'm having to do, like for my personal amps, the wire I've been using in them is probably pretty cheap stuff. I mean, it's only rated for like 300 volts, but I figured, the insulation isn't near anything else. It's not like it's touching the chassis. And so, if it's got a gap that far from the wire, it could be bare wire and it's not going to be a problem. So the insulation doesn't need to be rated at what the voltage is. But if I'm going to be selling these, you got to use 600 volt wire. So got some of that ordered. And there's some other things that I'm going to have to do, I think, to kind of make sure that these things are up to a standard where, nobody could say, hey, this thing's dangerous. I definitely don't want that sort of thing to get out. Or, for it to be a dangerous thing that I'm selling to the general public. So I'm being really careful about figuring all that stuff out. So anyway, hope you're enjoying my channel. If you are, please subscribe. Please like the video. Thanks to all you Patreon folks and also you folks that make donations at my website. A couple of you made some really generous ones lately, and it's helped me go buy a bunch of parts and tubes and stuff so I can go voice this amp, so I come back and show you guys, hey guys, don't waste your money. You don't need to go buy all these tubes. If you build this 6SQ7, or that 6SQ7, go buy some JJEL34Ls. If you get some Sylvania JAN tubes, which are fairly easy to find, that amp's going to sound great. And you don't need to waste your money buying these Tungsols or Hitachis or whatever. And I've kind of let the cat out of the bag on these National Union tubes, but thought I'd share that with you. I've got 2 pairs of them now. I got a pair in the amp and a pair here. It took me about 6 months to round those up, so good luck hunting those. They do sound really good in that amp. And we're going to figure out what's going to work good in this amp. It's just going to take some time. So anyway, I will see you next week for the Monday Monologue.